Welcome to the Do What You Can Live With podcast. I'm Brandi Mac, if you don't know me, but what I wanted to talk about was a few things because I just finished reading an amazing book by Shoshana Walter, and it's called Rehab. So Shoshana is an investigative journalist, and I was pretty blown away by this book. It's a very important listen, especially if your life has been impacted by addiction in any way. It covers how broken our treatment system is, which I have openly talked about for several years now, because once I saw it for what it was pretty devastating and heartbreaking for me, on all honesty. And, when you go through like the process, the cycle of, I guess, grief, anger was a big part of it. So a few years ago, when my eyes were really open, there was a lot of anger, and that really came across in my videos. I'm very much more grounded and have had time to process through it. My views on it still very much do not change. But the one thing that has changed is my education on it and a lot of the social, racial disparities that are taking place just throughout our country. If you haven't read it, please do. It's a good read, and if you really don't know much about it, you're going to learn quite a bit. There's some very impactful stories in it. And these are things, a lot of this really, I was actually really surprised. A lot of things that she talks about in this book, I have really been vocal about the last year. And my perspective and how I view addiction and potentially how we can help those struggling find a way out of it. Because a lot of it is they're stuck. For those maybe who don't know, I have a daughter who is now in recovery from IV fentanyl use, really IV everything, because usually if they're using one substance, if they can't get their hands on that one, they will get their hands on something else and still do it. So she really did it all, but her drug of choice was absolutely opioids and fentanyl. And as we know, many of us, fentanyl is taking thousands of lives every year, though we did finally see somewhat of a decrease last year in the numbers. We'll have to see how it plays out for 2025. There are a lot of cuts that have happened with this new administration, which was very upsetting for me. I don't quite understand, cutting off grant funding to a lot of these grassroots outreach programs that really have a focus of harm reduction. As someone who didn't previously support harm reduction, because in the beginning, one, I don't think I truly understood it, but that's how many times we get closed off in our own little worlds, especially if we live in small towns and maybe we don't see the heavy impact that addiction has like you do in some of these bigger cities and metropolitan areas. So having the opportunity to hear so many stories and interact with so many people, it really provided a completely different perspective. And I feel like this book will do that also. One of the things I want to focus on that she really kind of talked about in the book, which I haven't spoken much about, is how we need regulation and more oversight of sober homes. There are a lot of bad sober homes out there. I am aware that there are, I'm sure, a lot of amazing ones, but I'm going to talk about some of the issues I have with a lot of the models with these sober homes. One of them being that a huge amount will not allow people to be on medicated assisted treatment, such as Suboxone, Subutex, or Methadone while they're living in a sober home. With that being the gold standard treatment and how it has been shown to have the highest success rate when it does come to opioid use disorder, I really disagree with that, because something I learned from like my family's experience was, I used to think that inpatient was the answer every single time. And I think that inpatient definitely has its place as far as stabilization, but you're not going to get a transformation in 30 days. But, and this is why I think that initiating patients who are willing and want to try, say, Suboxone, I think it is very important for facilities to offer that, and then them be able to transition. I need to find the study. I might reach out to Shoshana and ask her, since I have her as a contact now, which is pretty cool. She mentioned in the book that it's actually recommended in evidence that patients are on like Suboxone or methadone for a minimum of 180 days. I know there's a lot of arguments regarding people are saying it should only be used for detox. You're trading one drug for another. Who made those rules? I say that I know where this comes from, but you're talking about a very old system that has been around, and drugs continue to evolve. They're getting stronger and stronger. And the thing is we have the highest overdose rates that we've ever had. This is nothing against like the 12-step model. And I can't say that enough, because I think there's a lot of value in the 12 steps. I really wish, I know there's some meetings that are more accepting. I really wish that they could kind of do an overhaul of it and it be, just more accepted, and this population be allowed to come to those meetings so that they can get sponsors and get that community, because these meetings are in every community. With it being around so long, people do need to feel like they have sober support. It's hard when you're trying to move away maybe from your friend group or people you're around. You want to be surrounded by other people who are also fighting for their recovery just as much as you are. So that's why I really think that the focus should just be on life, on happiness, on hope, and, compassion and empathy. It shouldn't be someone who's really fighting hard and maybe they failed at abstinence multiple times. It shouldn't be them being told by someone who was able to succeed with abstinence, them saying, "You're not sober." That is so wrong. I can't say that enough. To tell someone who is trying to accomplish what you have and they can't do it with abstinence, that doesn't mean that they don't want to do it with abstinence, but they can't. This is where you have to change that mindset, because these are people's lives on the line. And to shame them and judge them when they want the same thing you have, we have to be better humans, more compassionate. And so I really hope that as more people kind of speak out and are really recovering out loud, more people will kind of move away from that mindset. And that doesn't mean that you have to move away from a program that maybe saved your life. That's not what I'm saying, because that's important, right? That's your program that saved you. But that program can still greatly impact the future of the people who are needing to use medicated assisted treatment. And so that's why I ask you, if you're watching this and you are, an old timer, if you are just extremely dedicated to the 12-step abstinence model and that has helped you, please, I ask you not to shame those who just can't do it. The goal is always down the road. If they may find that they've recovered enough, they've gotten stability in their life, or they decide they want to wean off of those medications. Some, they're terrified. The reason why they don't want to consider weaning off is because they're terrified of losing everything. So that is a very valid fear. And so I just feel as a whole we can do better and stop this huge divide that is between the harm reduction, the MAT community, and the 12-step abstinent model. It's about living. It's about thriving. It's about having hope and giving others hope. My issue with sober homes, because housing is a huge issue for this population. When they have been homeless, they've been living on the streets, and maybe they have no family. Or their family has kind of just washed their hands of them because of the poor decisions and actions they had throughout their active addiction. Anyone who's lived it, we know it's extremely hard. And it's a horrible thing to live through. And so housing is a big piece. The likelihood of somebody being able to sustain sobriety with no housing, and they're forced to remain in the streets with other people who are still very deep in active use. It's a recipe for disaster. I don't see how they would succeed. So that's why I think it's really important that sober homes, they should have to allow people to be on medicated assisted treatment if that is what they want to be on. Now, how I see this in the future is when you have like buprenorphine extended release, which is Sublocade Brixadi. Those are the two options we have right now. If those patents ever get released and they actually ever become affordable, I think those are reasonable options where, okay, we don't want you potentially diverting, selling your strips if you're in the home and maybe tempting others who are trying abstinence, right? I think the injection is a great alternative because it's going to control those cravings, those thoughts of use, and allow them to focus on their recovery. However, it's extremely expensive. You have to pretty much, one, have a lot of money to pay for it out of pocket. Very few states cover, Medicaid will cover. Some do. I don't know how long that will last with the Medicaid cuts that are coming and the expansion. Some of those states may end up not covering it, which I think is horrible. My state here in Florida, they do not cover it. They will only cover Vivitrol and they will only cover Suboxone. My issue, like when you talk about Vivitrol, okay, I know Vivitrol has worked for many people. I was very aware of that drug from the beginning of my daughter's recovery. It had been mentioned. The problem I have with Vivitrol is that it's a blocker. There's nothing actually bound to the opioid receptor. I'm going to get a little scientific for you. There's nothing bound to that receptor. So if they try to use while they're on Vivitrol, they're at increased risk of an overdose. And so that's a big issue I have with it. And it just isn't as effective for opioid use disorder as Sublocade or Brixadi. So I can't stand how the pharmaceutical companies, they have such control over these meds and for so long. I understand they need to recoup their money. They need to make a profit. They are a business and we are a country built on capitalism, but these meds are important. And what's sad is the pharmaceutical companies know that. I'm hoping in the future they will eventually become more affordable and more available because I really think those are great options. Because something, if you don't know, Sublocade, Brixadi, they are wonderful if you're wanting to get off of Suboxone. The reason that is because Suboxone has a very long half-life and your body becomes dependent on it. I've talked to a lot of people where they've gotten all the way down to like 2 milligrams and that part was easy. But when they try to get off those last 2 milligrams, it is a huge struggle for them. And they feel like they're prisoners to it. And when you're wanting to get off something, I think the fact that we have 2 medications that are available to help them get off of that with virtually no withdrawal over a long period of time, I think they should be more available. That community should have the option to do that. I think it's great if people feel like they have reached a point in their recovery where they're ready. They need to be supported through that. So I think when it comes to sober homes, I think in the future, if they were more available, more affordable, I think that is a great alternative. And I don't see how sober homes would say no to that. But it's going to be an overhaul of the system and just changing the mindset and moving away from the stigma surrounding medicated assisted treatment. Because it is the gold standard and people can be on these meds long term. My daughter is actually on Sublocade and it's been great. She ended up getting, I think, 300 milligram shots, and now she's had several 100 milligram. And she definitely was experiencing like her only symptoms of really, I guess, would be any type of withdrawal, which was mild, uncomfortable, but not compared to the withdrawal people fear. Fear is her symptoms was she was sweating. So she was having like a lot of hot flashes, and that was it. Now, I mean, she would have beads of sweat on her, but that's not bad. And on top of it, it's summer. Now that she's had, I think it's 300 milligrams, I think her body has kind of weaned down enough after several 100 milligram shots because she's due to get her next shot next week and she's not having the hot flashes that she was having. So her body has continued to adjust. Now, she doesn't have any intention of getting off of Sublocade at this point, but she is also supposed to fall off of my insurance next year because she will turn 26. And like I said, Medicaid down here doesn't cover it. We will probably try to seek out a private policy of some sort, but there's no guarantee that they will cover the medication. But just in case, this was a great alternative to that because if she does lose that coverage and can't continue to get the injection, because we can't afford it, I've heard it can be easily like $2,000 a month. That ain't happening. Then at that point, she would be able to stop and she isn't going to have to worry about going into like acute withdrawal. And so that is really the beautiful thing about those medications. But back to housing, meeting people's basic human needs when it comes to wanting to find recovery, it is crucial. People need housing and they need some sort of support. And that brings me to employment. Many times they will have an arrest history because of their active use and choices they made. They have a past and they're ready to get their life on track. And now maybe they got housing. They're struggling to find employment that will give them an opportunity. This is why it's so crucial. We need programs in every single community to help them succeed because they need hope. They need hope that they're going to have a better life. And if there is no hope, if it seems like there's no out, why would you want to stop? We have to look at it as at the barriers that are in place that's not helping them succeed. That's why there needs to be programs in every community that can help them find employment. The book Shoshana wrote, she talked a lot about Synacort, which I already knew about, and how that program, like they were working their participants to death, basically, and they weren't getting to keep any of their money. How are they supposed to get on their feet when they're done and they complete it? They should be able to at least have a percentage of every check from the beginning go into an account that accrues and builds up to help them take care of legal fees, to help them, maybe purchase a car so that they can get back and forth. Because this whole idea, and this is something I had to learn, is holding them basically as prisoners, like inpatient treatment, even if it's a nice facility, a locked facility where they have zero freedom. That is not setting them up for success. I don't disagree with the idea of having that for stabilization, but they have to reacclimate to society. And so when my daughter came home and got sober, and like I said, she has over 1.5 years sober now. She wasn't a prisoner, and that was a very big shift for me. But I accepted. I was like, if she is going to use drugs, there is nothing I can do about it. My rule was don't bring drugs into my home, don't bring them on my property. But from the very beginning, when she came home, she could come and go as she pleased. And I think her having the choice to do so was very important for her because she made the right choices on her own. And this was coming off of IV fentanyl. She didn't go through detox. She didn't do inpatient that time. She had done inpatient 9 times before. And every time she got out, she got discharged, she relapsed within 30 days, every time. So her having that freedom and basically being told, you're not a prisoner, you are free to come and go. I am not going to micromanage you. I'm not going to micromanage who you talk to, where you go, but these are my boundaries. These are my rules. she was able to make adult decisions, and she made the right ones. And I was very skeptical. Trust me, I thought, what the fuck am I thinking? This is never going to work. But it did. And and so that's why I think like sober homes, sometimes having so much control and micromanaging things, they need to have some freedom in making their decisions, because I really think freedom and them learning to make decisions on their own, it builds confidence. And it's going to be a very slow build of confidence because they're going to be in this endless cycle of shame. But I think it is very important. Brooke and I actually were talking today, and she was just kind of reflecting on her mindset and where she was in the very beginning for the first 6 months, really maybe even the first year when she came home, and how she doesn't recognize that person when she reflects. Say, her and her sister getting into it for no reason, Brooke being triggered and not really being able to regulate her emotions at that time. There was big adjustments that took place because, she always went to treatment and now she was in the home. And so there were times where it could get hostile and there were arguments. And my view on that through all of it was they were both entitled to their opinion. I wasn't going to get mad at my other daughter because she had resentments and anger and disappointment towards her older sister who had been in active use for all these years and the impact it had on our family. She was entitled to those. And so it was not going to be, you're wrong, you're right. No, you both are right. Like in this situation, you're both entitled. My daughter struggled, Brooke, she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. And because her sister was just, more mature, she's the younger sister, more mature, she's further in life. And so Brooke really struggled with seeing her sister thrive in that capacity. And here she is 5 years older and way behind. And it's that cycle of shame that takes place. And I just had to tell her, it was really hard, but I would just tell her, I'd be like, listen, you both are at different points in your life right now. Where she's at does not mean you will never make it there. And I know it's hard, but you have to look at the accomplishments that you're doing right now, which were big accomplishments for her, considering how deep she was in addiction. So it was a complete mind shift, even for me, in approaching her in that way. I wasn't going to shame her. I had my own resentments, my own frustrations over the years, but I also look back now and I reflect and I see, I was being taught and told I needed to do tough love. I needed to not enable, let her hit rock bottom and cutting her off, which never really led to any type of healing. And so I couldn't be mad at her because with our family, me doing those things was really causing, I think, more harm than good. So, we were talking about hope because I was talking about the book Rehab with her today and telling her how I finished it. There were some stories that were really impactful and actually made me cry. She agreed. She's like, hope is so important. And otherwise, what's the point? If you don't have hope, what's the point? And so I think that's something I just kind of want to leave you guys with. If you listen to this and you work in addiction treatment, maybe you do harm reduction. Maybe you're sitting there wondering, what can we do to help this population get better? We need to speak out about these ideas, and we have to use our voices. We have to advocate. And because I have endless ideas of how I think we can help more people. And I think a big piece in like me writing my book, Do What You Can Live With, it was getting it out to families, for families to see that you can try another way. If what you're doing just feels awful and doesn't feel right, it's okay. And that's the thing is my book is just about giving you permission to be okay in your decisions, because they're your decisions and it's about what you can live with, not what I can live with. what you can live with. And I think that's really important just in life in general, every decision we make, because any of us could die at any time. And so if you hear like the saying, don't go to bed mad or angry, like with your loved one, because what if they died? The last thing you did was argue, or you said, I hate you. Always make it a point to try to end it, with at least I love you. I know we had this disagreement, but I love you. And that's even for them in active addiction, because if you've lost them, that's going to give you a little bit of peace through that horrible pain to know that the last words you at least said were, I love you. But I would love to hear your guys' feedback. Please comment, leave a review on the podcast. It will always be uploaded to YouTube. Please comment, like, share. And if you have any insights as to how you think we can help this population better, gosh, please message me. I highly encourage it because I would love to hear what you're thinking. But if you guys are interested in purchasing my book, Do What You Can Live With, it's a survival guide for families navigating addiction, grief, and impossible choices. It's huge. It has a 4.9 rating on Amazon, and I am just blown away. But it is available. I think it's $19.99 on Amazon. I do have a digital copy on my website, and digital is, of course, available on Amazon also. But yeah, you guys take care, and until next time.